Yeah. In the last class, we have learn about that example. Okay, and we were we were we were yeah yeah we learned about all these iterations and 1, 2, 3, 4. The iteration 4, what are all the advantages that we see, when we are going with the Spring. Okay, and these things actually, we were utilizing in the local. We were utilizing in the coupling. Okay, so what exactly the coupling, right? How much we can make coupling as very important, right? So when it is tightly coupled, actually, there are several examples that which are very much important, like uh, to give you an example. Okay, the for the coupling, right, engine is easily change that, and where we can easily go ahead and without a much impact. If we are doing some changes, yeah, we call it as yeah. So the coupling is important everywhere. So there are, like, tightly coupled and loosely coupled. Okay. So example, like, if you wanted to buy a laptop, and laptop is kind of loosely coupled with your home, and but the computer is on another hand, has a little difficult, to get the daily exercises, right? So that's why, coupling is like very much important thing, to in our real life. So, and it is even more important, in building a great software, right? So only thing constant in technology is change. So business requirement change, frameworks, and change, code changes. Okay, we want we want loose coupling as much as possible, so that we wanted to make functional change with the less code changes, right, as possible. Let's explore how the Java interfaces and Spring framework help with loosely coupling. Okay, so let's start with what why where exactly we use Spring Boot. Okay, so why the Spring Boot is, and we'll find out the history of Spring Boot, and we'll see a couple of examples how to build a application. Okay, and okay, why Spring Boot, right? So Spring Boot actually enables a very easy way of building applications, uh, without application for web applications, and also REST API without Spring Boot. Okay, so what is need for Spring Boot, right? What are all the goals? How does Spring Boot work? And we'll compare all the Spring related MVC, Spring, and also Spring Boot, the comparison between them, we are going to see that. And world before Spring Boot. Okay, so when we are talking about Spring Boot, it is setting up Spring projects before Spring Boot was not easy. So dependency management system, and define web application, like, in the web.xml, and manage Spring Beans that we have to write it into the context.xml. Okay. So fourth one, implement non-functional requirements, that is NFRs, to and repeat this for every new project. So typically it takes a few days to set up for each project and countless hours to maintain them. And building REST API with Spring Boot. Okay, so why Spring Boot, right? You can build REST API without Spring Boot. What is needed for Spring Boot? Yeah, how to build a great REST API. Okay, we'll just check on that. So identifying resources, like what kind of REST API that you wanted to expose, to the users. So what are all those? So yeah, first we need to identify those resources. Like, in our case, we're just, using /user/users ID and, /posts. Okay. So all these things, that we wanted to create a resources, for that. And the next one is identifying actions, like, what kind of actions that we have, and, utilize them. Yeah. And defining request and response structures and using appropriate request response status like 200, 404, and 500. So understanding the REST API best practices. Yeah. So what's the most important goal for Spring Boot, right? Spring Boot actually build production ready applications very quickly. Okay. So when we say quickly, behind the screen, actually it is working with, several Spring Boot, projects, right? The first one is Spring Initializer, and the second one is Spring Boot starter projects, and the Spring Boot auto configuration, and Spring Boot dev tools. Okay, and all these things, will really help, to understand what's going on with the issue. And Spring Initializer, right? We will go through each and everything, one by one, uh, in the next steps. But for production ready, it's like logging different configuration for different environments in like profiles and configuration properties, and then monitoring using Spring Boot Accutator. So these are the most important goal of Spring Boot, which are really helping us, to create certain apps. Okay, so exploring the Spring Boot starter projects. So there are a lot of frameworks, that to be built in an application feature. Okay, so you can build a REST API, you can write unit testings, and you can, you know, you can utilize the Spring starter projects and variety of starter projects. Okay, and other than this, actually, we go with Spring Boot starter, Spring Boot auto configuration, Spring Boot dev tools, and the profiles. Okay, so let's start with Spring Boot starter projects. Okay, so Spring Boot starter projects actually, will give you a lot of advantages when you are starting a new project in Spring. Okay, and you can build a REST API, you can write unit tests, and you can write, you can create a status, okay, convenient dependency descriptor for different features. Okay, so we can group them and make it easy to build all the applications. Spring Boot provides variety of starter projects. Okay, so Spring Boot starter web, which is having web MVC, Spring Web, and Spring Boot starter project. Spring Boot starter Tomcat, JSON. Okay, it has unit tests. When if you wanted to talk with JPA, it has that Spring Boot starter data JPA, data JDBC. Okay, and the Spring Boot starter security for securing your REST APIs. So all these are all these are like Spring Boot starter projects, and all these things will come whenever we are trying to create an example. Okay, so exploring Spring Boot auto configuration. So it's need, yeah, a lot of configuration, okay, to build a Spring app, right? So we have like component scan, dispatches alert, data sources, JSON conversion. All these things will come under Spring Boot auto configurations, and you don't require to specifically do something. If you have the So if you build a Spring app, then all these Spring Boot auto configuration, whatever we are seeing it here, it will be auto configured. So how can I simplify this, right? Auto configuration, automated configuration for your app. Okay, decide based upon two things. Okay, first is which framework or in the class path, and what is existing configuration and annotations, etc. Okay, depending on that, you can really simplify more. So there are like Spring Boot starter web projects. There are there are other projects, okay, which are using like dispatches alert, and dispatches alert is kind of when we have UI component related. So dispatches alert is going to help us passing those requests and all, right? And the embedded servlet container, that is Tomcat, is default embedded server customizer account configuration. So that means you will be getting a Tomcat, dedicated Tomcat for you to run the application. And there are default error pages that Spring Boot provides, and there are like Jackson HTTP message converter. So that means like you can convert JSON to Bean and Bean to JSON. The vice versa, both will work in the Spring Boot starter web. And if you want to build more faster dev tools, right, more faster applications, yeah, we generally use this dev tool, which is going to help us to deploy the application without much yeah. So if you are doing some changes in the application, okay, generally we go there and we deploy that change into the application, and then you restart your server, right? So what the change is like, if you are using Spring Boot dev tools, like then wherever you're stuck with that, and Okay, wherever you do the some code changes, and you don't require to worry about the deployment and all. Spring Boot DevTools actually will help us to run the code automatically to deploy the code automatically to the same class, like wherever we are setting up. And yeah, after that, if you want to get something else from the Spring Boot DevTools, okay, so uh, we need to add this you know dependency manually if you wanted to use Spring Boot DevTools. Okay, yeah, and whenever we have some pom.xml changes, it will not take that effect. You have to do it manually. And the other advantage is managing app configuration using profile. So when we are developing an application with which contains all these configurations, like if you wanted to deploy the same file into dev, QA, and SIT, so that time we if you wanted to go with this environment specific, so you know uh, the profiles are going to play main role over here. Okay, so how can we provide, right? Different environments need different configuration, so different databases, right? Different web services. So that's how we are going to divide based upon the profile. Okay, environment specific like dev, SIT, and production. Okay, so depending on that profiles, you can just directly define the externalized configuration properties under this, okay, for your application. So define the properties externalization configuration. So the most important thing is how do we deploy this application to the uh, you know to the server, right? So generally, in the previous days, actually, we usually restart ourselves and we create some Java application, and then, we deploy that into a Tomcat, and, we usually run that application, and then, we will start using that. But in case of embedded server concept, okay, it was very simple and alternative. So it won't really require any var file. So it simply look for the jar file where we can connect the uh, where we can easily deploy the applications into Tomcat. Okay, so which is an embedded server. And there are other embedded server examples. One is Spring Boot Starter Tomcat, Starter Jetty, and Starter Undertow. Yeah, and there is one more concept like called Spring Boot Actuator. Okay, so this is going to help us, to monitor the endpoints, okay, of each and every app, and also there are yeah. So when we wanted to do monitoring on our application, yeah, Spring Boot Actuator, we have to enable this one, and we will be able to see a lot of things, on our application. So how many beans were there, and what was the health of our application, whether and the metrics of our application, and also mappings, request mappings, and all those things, will be coming under Spring Boot Actuator. Okay, so we will go through an example of Spring Boot, which will tell you the complete life cycle, and what are all the things that we discussed. We are going to see it in there. Okay, but after that, actually, we can just go through this one, understanding Spring Boot versus Spring MVC versus Spring, right? So yeah, before going through that example itself, we'll complete this, and we'll go for the next one. Okay. So there is not much difference between all these Spring Boot and Spring MVC versus Spring. right? So Spring Framework is famous for very the conventional way of dependency framework, and component and auto wide, all those things, we'll be having at the Spring side. And just dependency injection is not enough and sufficient, to develop most of the applications, right? So you need we need other frameworks, to build the apps as well, right? So Spring modules and Spring projects extend Spring ecosystem, so provide good integration with other frameworks like Hibernate, JPA, and Mockito unit testing. So there we come, Spring MVC. So this is Spring module, right? So this simplifies, the building of web applications, okay? Uh, Web applications, and because there were a lot of there are other options like structs were very complex to build the applications, okay? And it is also having a pretty much good background for REST calls, and we have several annotations like at the rate controller, REST controller, and request mapping, to which will be helping us, to create some code, right? Yeah. And the last one is Spring Boot. Spring Boot is okay. So it was famous for building an application production ready and quickly. This is the one. So it has like a lot of other advantages, starter projects, auto configurations, and we have other enable functional requirements like NFS actuator, embedded server, logging, and also profile configurations. All these things, okay? When you compare between Spring Boot versus Spring MVC versus Spring, there is nothing big, but there is very quite difference between all these. Okay, there is a lot of difference, when we compare them to our local ones. Yeah, and yeah, first we are going to see how to create a normal web service call, and then we'll go and work on this Learn JP and Hibernate approach. Okay, so we are going to create a Spring Boot project with H2 database. So one is H2. H2 is kind of a in-memory database. So you don't require to connect to some of the famous database options. Okay, like Oracle or MongoDB or any other DB. You don't require to do it because H2 can manage that. And the other one is we can utilize Spring JDBC to play with the course table which we created on H2. Okay, and the same way use JP and Hibernate to play with the course table. And the last the Spring Data JPA will come into the picture, and it will play with the course table. Okay, so this is the example that we're going to see it. Okay, and we'll just compare between all these things, right? So JDBC to Spring JDBC to JPA to Spring Data JPA. So what will be the differences, right? So JDBC, we write a lot of SQL statements, okay, SQL queries, and we usually it's kind of pretty much SQL on Java, and you're also writing a lot of Java code to help them, okay, in write a lot of Java code, okay, when we are utilizing JDBC. And when it comes to the Spring JDBC, right, we write a lot of queries, okay, but a lot of SQL queries, but lesser Java code, because we are going to utilize some kind of placeholder parameters when we when it comes to the Spring JDBC. And yeah, so it minimizes that lesser Java code, and it has most of the inbuilt inbuilt things that we can utilize in Spring JDBC. And the next level, when we come to the JPA, we do not worry about queries. Okay, so the queries will be auto handled, and also just we need to map the entities and tables. Okay, so there won't be any code for JPA. And when it comes to the Spring Data JPA, the final version of the all these things, and very efficient version. So let's make JPA even more simple. Okay, so you don't require to write anything. Spring Data JPA will take care of everything. Okay, so there are like few several classes that we are going to add it over there, and those classes will help you directly to yeah. So Spring Data JPA will enable that lot of easier steps. you know um, you don't require to write anything on the code, right? So that's what Spring Data JPA does. And these are the very simple example between JDBC and Spring JDBC example. So you're writing a lot of code in the JDBC example, to delete one of the table, or one of the row from a table, right? So that's what the code that it looks like. And when it comes to the Spring JDBC example, okay, so this is how it's very less like just trying to just update that with one line. JDBC template is one of the predefined classes which we have it under the Spring, and which enables all the database connections and all, right? So okay, so in we are going to deal with the JPA, right? So in the same way, we have a multiple JPA definitions, right? Defined specifications. So we have Hibernate is one of the popular implementation of JPA, but using Hibernate directly would result in a lock into Hibernate. So there are other JPA implementations that we wanted to implement in the application. So then, strictly don't go with Hibernate. We can just directly go with Spring JPA, and whenever if you required some changes or something, yeah, you can still do that, without getting the help from Hibernate. Okay. So yeah, this would be very, very, very easy way of approach if you are going to utilize with JPA. And yeah, so that defines a lot of things, and it is an API. So uh, like you can learn about how do you define entities, and how do you map attributes, manage entities, all these things. JPA can easily do it on its own. And Hibernate is one of the most popular implementations of JPA, right? So just using Hibernate directly would result in a log into Hibernate. So whenever if you wanted to try some other operations, so then you can utilize this Tuplink and some other examples of the JPA implementation. Okay. Yeah, we'll go through that example once it is done. We'll start deploying that into a Docker. Okay. Yep, that's all for today. Okay, so thanks. If you have any questions, let me know.